All right, well, here's a few news articles I thought were interesting. So there are these driverless cars in San Francisco now. They're available to pick up people, I think only at night, but they have a defect. They keep on having problems, and then they just stop in the middle of the road and wait there for someone to go in and save them. And they keep blocking the road with a bunch of these cars stopped dead, fouling up traffic. So the transportation agencies are complaining about that, and hopefully they'll do something about it. This is one of the puzzles of the solar system, has been for a long time. One of the planets is on its side, rotating with its axis parallel to the plane in which all the other planets reside, instead of close to perpendicular like all the other planets. And no one has ever understood why. And they now have an explanation, which is very strange, saying that all you need is an object, I think twice the size of our moon, and it just has to gradually move away from the planet. And that motion, like our moon is moving away from the planet, it's fairly common that they do that, that motion will be enough to cause this to tilt and stay down there. So it would be nice to have a simple explanation of why that happens. Half the mass of our moon would have done it. Anyway, it's but the first time they have an explanation of how this can happen. And of course, the next explanation is, if it happened there, why didn't it happen to Jupiter and Saturn and all that? So, but anyway, it's progress on understanding the one of the strange aspects of the solar system. So malaria is a parasite that lives in mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes inject it into people, and then they get malaria. And they've tried to make a vaccine. They had the first vaccine out there, which is a lot better than the no vaccine we had before, but it's still not that good. So they're making a new version. They've genetically modified the malaria and put it back in the mosquitoes, and they're developing it in mosquitoes. And people have to let mosquitoes bite them hundreds of times to get a dose of the vaccine for testing. Now, they're not planning to do it this way forever. They're just doing this temporarily to refine the vaccine, and they're hoping they can make a more accurate vaccine by growing it in its native environment of the mosquitoes, and then presumably later on make more controlled things that you inject with a injection needle the usual way. I was glad to see this in the Washington Post. This is what I thought. I mean, it is unconstitutional for Biden to forgive student loan debts, but and that's what he said until recently, and that's what Nancy Pelosi said, but what they realized is it's very difficult to sue, because you can only sue about something, even if it is illegal, if you can show that it harmed you. And their claim is that nobody can actually be harmed by doing this. And people have tried various suits claiming that they can measure what's harm to be done, so we'll see what happens. But the Washington Post has a nice article explaining how this is really poor way to run the government. If you let Biden do this, then why wouldn't you let Trump just build the wall and allocate money to build the wall and everything else? I mean, there's a reason why the president is not supposed to be able to spend money without congressional oversight. So we'll see. He might get away with it because of a loophole in the law that it's hard to sue, but it's hardly the wise precedent for the future. So Hyundai has a defect, and I haven't seen, there's TikTok videos that show you how to steal a Hyundai. This is apparently very easy to do. There are some Hyundais that use an old-fashioned mechanical key, and apparently it's very easy to steal them. So after the TikTok videos run around, they're getting stolen like crazy. Like 40% of all the stolen vehicles in some towns are these Hyundais. So Hyundai has responded by selling people a kit for $170, which can be installed, which makes it harder to steal the car, which is a lot of people feel abused. They say, wait a minute, this car is defective and you're charging us to fix the defects. But anyway, I would like to have more technical details, like how they're stealing the Hyundais. I wonder if it's interesting. It sounds like it's just some kind of mechanical lockpicking or something. But anyway, there are various other solutions. But apparently the thing is, it doesn't, all you have to do is pick the lock and open the door, and they haven't secured the ignition or anything inside. Anyway, we'll see what comes of that. This was amazing. Where I grew up, I was raised by Puritans essentially, and it's all about self-control. If you do anything that society doesn't approve of, you should just try harder to control yourself. And that's why it's justified to have harsh punishments on criminals and stuff. But increasingly, it's turning out that the attitude, which we thought was more the California attitude, where you don't blame people for doing wrong things, you just say they're sick or something, seems to be more and more true. Like, I was amazed. There are antidepressants that have a side effect of causing you to commit suicide, which would seem to defeat the point. And there are drugs which have a side effect of making you into a compulsive gambler. And this is the kind of stuff that makes you think what appears to be a moral failing may be a biochemical failing, and this is amazing. All you have to do is give people folic acid, which is a B vitamin, and it lowers their chance of committing suicide by like 44%, which means that suicidal ideation and depression is probably, to a large extent, just a biochemical problem that you could treat with a biochemical. So again, it's the evidence is increasing that yelling at people that are doing a bad thing and saying they should just try harder is often not as effective as figuring out that they've got a illness of some kind and treating the illness. You can remove your car's ignition fuse to thwart thieves. Well, yes, I imagine you could. Yeah, I know people with old cars that are sort of broken and hard to start, and that's a simple solution. I know some people will just install a switch someplace in the ignition system, like under the seat or something, and you have to know where to throw the switch, and that would probably also stop thieves to some extent. This was amazing. As you know, they had this huge hurricane in Florida, and it destroyed a whole bunch of towns and bridges and everything, and killed a bunch of people. And there was a town, this is the town, a new town built to survive hurricanes and be completely solar. It has these tons of solar panels, and what they did was they designed the roads to be gutters. So the houses, I guess, are on little hills or something. The roads are intended to carry the runoff from the rain. And the hurricane went right over this town, and it survived fine. They didn't lose power. They didn't lose water. They just had minor damages, like a couple small trees falling down and a few shingles off the roof. But nobody had to leave. Nobody had to do anything. It was right in the path of the hurricane. So they have figured out how to build strong housing in Florida that can withstand these things. And they've got a waiting list to get in there. It's quite a hit.
That's
So.
really cool.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about Pegasus spyware. Well, as I remember, Pegasus is something that came out years ago, one of the government spywares that people put on your machine. I don't know anything new about it. Anyway, and yeah, it's very interesting. And what is this garbage? Looks like Financial Times is blocking this article. Let's move on to the next one. All right. This was very interesting in the Washington Post. They are having huge trouble getting educators for K through 12. So it's a huge problem to where and many teachers are quitting. It's miserable. After the pandemic, many of these students are very far behind, and many of them have behavioral problems because they haven't learned proper discipline. So they're importing them from the Philippines. Large quantities of teachers from the Philippines will come here hoping to have a good experience in America, make a lot of money, and they have to pay huge amounts of money to get here. They go into sort of indentured servitude. And anyway, they explain what happened. And I think this was in Arizona. She moved into this K through 12 school that was incredibly desperate. Everybody was working overtime to an insane extent. But they found out that they couldn't get anything done. The students don't listen. They just throw things around. They have no discipline. You can't teach them anything. They ignore everything you say. And she's very, very frustrated. And they're trapped here for like 3 or 4 years on their indentured servitude, so they eventually learn how to do something. And it's very interesting to read. This is why I'm a high school dropout. High school was just basically prison with nothing but gangs beating people up, nobody learning anything, and I just left and went to college. However, it's still happening, and I think it's very interesting to hear her story. It reminds me very much of my high school experience. Rainbow Cash is just making trouble. So. What's that?
Did you go to high school here in the city?
No, I went to high school in Pennsylvania, in a rural town. But I've heard there's some good ones here. Like my extended family sends people to private Catholic schools, and they say it's a lot better, like this one here, which I imagine is true. But where I was from, the public school was just a place to, kill time until you end up in prison or in the army. That was the only thing. There was no learning of any kind going
I
on.
think it's a little different here, or at least through my experience. I was graduate, but
It was,
it
but
varies around.
yeah, there it was just gangs beating each other up. It was basically prison.
Yeah.
And my parents kept telling me not to take it seriously because they knew all the teachers who they'd been teaching in college, and they said those teachers don't know anything, and that was largely true. Anyway, all right. Well, I appreciate the kind wishes, but I think it's just Rainbow Cash making trouble. Anyway, so that's interesting to hear about that. And So the Supreme Court has started its next term today, and after the last one, you can expect them to do really drastic things. The right-wing court has a majority, and they're determined to just ram through right-wing policies with complete disregard for the truth and the law, apparently. So anyway, there's a lot of things coming up, very serious things having to do with voting, racial gerrymandering, and many other issues coming up, and we'll see how bad they are. We can expect quite a lot more drastic rulings like Roe versus Wade. This was interesting. Lasers amplify light. If you have a certain amount of light, you have atoms that have stored energy, and they will release it when a light hits them by emitting exactly the same light. And so you amplify the light, keeping it perfectly the same color and perfectly the same phase. And you wonder if there's a limit, and these guys found out what the limit is. And the limit is when the individual photons get so highly energetic that they will spontaneously decay into an electron and a positron. And so that sets the limit on it. So that's an interesting consequence I hadn't thought of. The strongest possible laser light has been calculated. I don't think they built a laser that can do it, but there is a limit to how much amplification you can do. Anyway, that's enough of this. Yeah, 6-3, conservative versus lib. Yeah, and the faith in the Supreme Court has gone way down. There have been times in the past when the Supreme Court was obviously just a political agent organ, and this is another one of them.